In my episode today, we're going to be talking about all things HR. We're going to be talking about it with somebody who understands this from legislation and from being a consultant in HR for over 15 years, as well as actually running a clinic herself. So, Norelle Pratt is the founder and principal HR consultant at HR for Health Leaders, with over 15 years of experience in human resources and tertiary qualifications in HR and industrial relations. Norelle combines deep industry expertise with real-world business experience. As a former co-owner of a thriving clinic, she understands firsthand the challenges of managing a team while running a successful and profitable practice. Now she helps business owners streamline the hiring process, implement pay structures that support profitability, and eliminate the overwhelm of navigating employment legislation, employment contracts, and documentation. We share a lot of experiences. Norelle and I go back a long time. We've known each other quite some time. And I'm really excited that you get to hear about this experience. I think it's something that's super important in our industry because so many people still don't understand the importance of knowing what the legislation is, paying correctly, the responsibilities and requirements around superannuation and independent contractors, and the level of control that is required and allowed at all levels. So I'm really looking forward to this episode. I trust that it's super helpful. If you are looking at employing, or that could be your next step, or maybe when you listen to this, you're like, I'm not sure that this is what I'm doing the right thing. Norelle is a wealth of knowledge, and we will put some incredible show notes for you in here for some amazing resources that she has put together. So enjoy the episode. Hey, Norelle, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here today.
Norelle, look, I'm so excited to be able to have this conversation today. I believe that it's a really important conversation to have in this industry. We have known each other a long time, and many people have heard of you and the incredible work that you do. But for those that are listening in for the first time, or maybe haven't heard about what it is that you do you want to share a bit of an overview of how did you get into HR for Health Leaders?
Absolutely. Okay, so I guess I started in HR. So I've been working in HR for almost 15 years now. And sometimes I think, am I old enough to say that? But apparently we get older and that happens. And it must have been, geez, I don't know, do you remember? Maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. I was with my previous partner. He had a career change, started running a remedial massage clinic. And of course, I was helping with that, as anyone who runs a business knows the work that goes into it. And so essentially, I was still working in corporate HR roles, helping him run the business on the side, doing lots of the back-end admin, learning how to do marketing, going to six-figure with James and Alicia, and doing all the things, hiring staff. We had a team of about 4 therapists and one admin most of the time. Yeah, and then one day Leisha asked me, have you thought about doing consulting? And I had not, but I was casually giving everyone advice on what to do with hiring, and that was how the business was born. So I started about 5 years ago, actually. I can't believe it's been that long. And originally it was more of a side thing. And, I'd have a couple clients call me here and there that had been referred, and now I've quit my full-time job and am working full-time in consulting.
This is amazing. It's an amazing journey. And what I love about your story is that you understand it from a HR perspective. So you know the legislation, the laws, all the kind of stuff, but you've got actual experience of running practice. So you
Yeah.
know firsthand what it's like if you don't have great things in place, if you don't have the right marketing, if you don't have the right
Yeah.
team, efficiency in your roster,
Mm-hmm.
like all that
Yep.
kind of stuff, and what can happen when this goes wrong. And I
Absolutely.
think that's where it was like, no, really, I need to have this conversation with you, because literally I could see you handing out all this advice to everyone, and it was really on point. I'm like, this needs to be happening, because there's still misinformation in the massage industry, and that's
Yeah.
what we will chat a little bit about today. And
Yeah.
my understanding this is so important. I remember
Mm-hmm.
seeing a quote from, I think it was just on the ATO website, where it was like, you make thousands of decisions in your business every day. Ensure that HR is done well. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's like that with a lot of things. We do have, hundreds of decisions that we have to make all the
Mm-hmm.
time. And it can be really easy to just go off the experience we've had, whether, and especially if we've been in the industry a long time, it's like, well,
Yeah.
I did it this way, I was employed this way, or I was contracted this way, so I'll just do it the way I know best. And
Hmm.
yet things have changed.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's start at the start. When making the decision on hiring your first, so you've gotten to the point where you're like, I'm ready to hire. This is going to be amazing. This is
Yeah.
gonna be awesome. What are some differences between like room rentals, service agreements, employees? Like, can you
Hmm.
tell us a little bit about what are the options for people that are looking to
Yeah.
broaden the team?
Absolutely. We can talk a bit generally about it. It's hard, we can't give legal advice on a podcast. But, from a general perspective, I would say that if you want to go down the route of having room rentals, service agreements, contractors, whatever you want to call it, whichever way you set it up, um, it's the legality of it largely depends on your willingness to not have as much control, is probably the very simple way to put it. The more control you have over the way that someone works, is the more indicative it is that they should be an employee. So if you want to, we used to talk about things like dictating uniforms and, like it was a bit bland. I actually listened to a really good podcast from a lawyer who specialized in the medical and allied health space. She did a really nice job of this. We can link that as well if anyone wants to look at it. She definitely talks a lot about how if you are going to do contracting or service agreements, the way in which you must do them to make them legal, with some very practical allied health tips, not just the generic things you read on the ATO website.
Yeah.
So some of the things are like down to as, are you defining how much they can charge? Are you dictating how much time they have between appointments? So for example, in massage, it might be 15 minutes. For physios, it might be you must have back-to-back appointments. However they want to structure that, if you're defining that, it is more indicative that they should be an employee because that is control. If you want them to come to staff meetings and you make it mandatory, that is control. So what happens is most of the time when I talk to people who are running clinics, they realize that they want that control. They want it to appear as part of their business. They want to be able to dictate the way that they service their clients. Therefore, they should have employees. So it's probably the easiest way to put it. And then if you're like, I'm happy to not have that level of control, I effectively just want to rent out rooms and they can do whatever they want. That's sort of how you have to think about it. And if you're willing to do that, great. Like, and some people do, right? Especially if you have multimodality clinics. Like sometimes people will say, maybe it'd be cool to have a physio rent a room in my clinic. They can do their own thing. They can charge what they want. They can manage it however they want. Then that can work with a room rental or like services agreement if you've got reception services that are included as part of the rental. So I think that explains it.
Absolutely it does. It's a really good explanation because I think where we start splitting hairs and going back to what we've known in the past is that
Mm,
I was deemed a subcontractor in
yeah.
my first position that I held.
Yeah.
That's what it was called. There
Hmm.
was no written agreements.
Yep.
They maintained the money. I
Hmm.
could charge what I wanted. Um, when I asked them about it, I was told that I'd be giving up the lease on my room. Obviously, I had
Right.
no lease and
Yeah.
paid on a percentage basis. So,
Yeah.
in terms of grey shaded areas, this is your classic, like no one knows
Yeah.
what is going on here. And a lot of people, it's like, well, I would take that and did take that information, go, well, I subcontracted, I'll make it way better on them. I'll take on
Hmm.
board all of the risk. All they have to do is show up. And at the end of the day, when we look at what the actual legislation, what our award says,
Hmm.
it doesn't actually stack up a lot of the time.
Yeah.
You want to share a little bit about your experience in that kind of subcontractor employee model that we see so often and so prevalent in the industry?
Yeah. I think a lot of people think that contracting will be easier or is less risky because they don't have to worry about whether they have enough clients, for example. And that can be true, but it doesn't make it legal, right? And also, just because you write something on a piece of paper doesn't make it legal. Like if I agree to sell your house to someone else, that's not legal just because I wrote it down in a contract, you know. So if you write in a contract that the contractor, classic example, is responsible for their own superannuation, you can't do that because the legislation states you are the responsible for it as the business owner if certain criteria are met. So generally, if they are a sole trader, this is the therapist, they're a sole trader, they don't have the right to delegate their work to someone else, and they work primarily for their labor, which massage therapists 100% do, any allied health. You know, unless you're a builder and more than half of the invoice is for materials and the product produced, not your labor, then you meet that test. Then the employer is responsible for super, even if you are legitimately a contractor. And so many people get caught out by that and still do. I've also had some big clinics I've spoken to in the more general allied health space. So, for example, physio, OT, chiros, that sort of level, where they've got large 10 plus practitioner facilities. And I had one person say to me, I don't want to change my contractors to employees because I'm worried that I will get a payroll. I'm worried I'll have to pay payroll tax. So most people in small businesses will never worry about this. But if you exceed a certain threshold, you have to pay a percentage of your wage bill in additional payroll tax because government likes its taxes. It's around $1 million plus or minus, depending on your state. So don't worry about it if you're well below that. And I was like, you do realize that in a lot of states, the payroll tax legislation includes fees paid to contractors, unless you have very specifically written your legal agreements to not avoid that, but to be structured in a way that they are not deemed wages for the legislation purposes. You know, people just they don't know this. And I think the same thing with the super, right? And it just isn't the case. Yeah, it doesn't matter what you've written. If it doesn't comply with the legislation, it is not legal, and the court will just throw it out with the paper it's written on.
That's right. And this is an experience that I had,
Yes.
wanting to really just grow my team and give them everything I possibly could. And at the end of the day, had in their contract that their super was included in their wages, which
No,
is why
right.
they paid so high, and as an hourly rate.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the ATO looked into it and audited us, I was deemed to have created sham contracts, which is what it's
Mm-hmm.
called, unintentionally and inadvertently, and had to
Mm-hmm.
repay super based on the level of money I had given them, not based on the award, but based on
Mm-hmm.
the money I had paid them.
Yep.
So not only was I back paying super, which is outside of when it's outside of the year that you were meant to pay it, it then becomes your personal money. So it's not tax
Mm.
deductible. Plus, you get a fine from the ATO, and then you get to shiver in your boots anytime any superannuation letters arrive on your doorstep for a very long time
Uh-huh.
until you've done some work. You know,
Yeah.
I'm saying with some eye twitching. If you're
Uh-huh.
and
Oh.
this is why I believe these conversations are
Mm.
so valuable, vital, and unbelievably important, because what I've shared in a 30-second overview is like 3 or 4 years of my life that was
Mm-hmm.
incredibly hard because, like, I'm a super honest person. I wanted the
Mm-hmm.
best for everybody. And at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day, it didn't matter what the paper was written on, it didn't
Mm-hmm.
match the legislation. So
Yeah.
therefore they were deemed inaccurate. So
Yeah.
um, great. So now that we've scared the crap out of everybody who's listening, who's thinking, but I just wanted to hire, and bearing in mind we are specifically mentioning Australian
Yes.
HR laws here, because we do have people that listen in from North America and all over the world. So this is specifically around, and if you're from the USA, you have an enormous amount of more legislations that you actually have to conform with. But in
We
Australia,
have different states.
that's exactly right. There's
Yeah.
a whole heap of different stuff. So,
Mm-hmm.
let's talk a little bit about structuring remuneration-based
Mm-hmm.
rates. Like, how does that all work? If someone's like, okay, I've decided I want to do it the right way, and I can either have this service agreement where it's essentially it's a tenant, or I want
Mm-hmm.
to hire, how do I kind of structure that, and how do I know?
Yeah. And I think you made a really good point there about you inadvertently did the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely what I see a lot of the time. I do not often see people who are intentionally out there trying to rip off their therapists, right? They are trying to do the right thing based on how they were employed originally and based on what they think the therapist wants, because oftentimes we see therapists coming out of TAFE or their colleges, and their lecturers have said, no, you don't want to be an employee. You want to be a contractor, and you should get this percentage of your earnings. So sometimes the therapists have also been fed this rhetoric. And so we're pushing the proverbial barrel of smelly stuff up a hill. I was like, do I swear? Maybe we'll keep it PG. Because you're, as an employer, you're also battling with therapists who think they want to be contractors, and therefore you also have to convince them of why they should accept your offer of employment, not just because it's legal, but because it's, that's actually how it should be done. And that they won't be worse off. And then sometimes they'll be better off. But they often don't see that until you can lay it out. And often as a business owner, you also don't see it until you do the figures. It's hard to wrap your head around if you haven't tried it before and don't have any way to do it. Yeah, so that's definitely something we see. Another, just a random aside that I remembered, one of the things around control was a lot of lawyers won't actually write in restraint of trade clauses for contractors, because they basically say if they are running their own business, they are their clients. And that's a big one that often people aren't very happy with, and another push towards employment. Okay, so thinking about money. So the award says, so the Health Professionals and Support Services Award covers everyone in allied health in Australia, unless you are a sole trader or a partnership or a trust in WA. And then lucky I live in WA, so I know that system, so we can talk about that separately. But essentially it's a very similar structure. So the award says there are minimum rates of pay based on experience and qualifications. And there are varying rates depending on whether it's weekdays or weekend rates or late nights, etc. So I have a little calculator that I created. I'm happy to share that if you want to stick a link to that before. I think James and I did a webinar on it a couple of, it's late last year. It was probably 6 months ago now. It was a while ago. So some of the people may have seen it in there. And essentially works through, if you have a roster, so like let's say you have someone rostered for 4 treatments, an hour of treatment, 15 minutes between clients, which is pretty standard. We'll go with that example. It's a 5-hour shift. There's a word I'm looking for. And let's say the minimum pay rate it's probably about 35 an hour now for a new graduate. And I'm going to grab a calculator because I'm not great at this off the top of my head.
And while you're working that out, we will send you through the wages and profitability worksheet, which is where Norelle is getting this information from. And the reason that we're just using this as an example is because things change. Like you might listen to this podcast in the next couple of weeks, you might listen in the next few months or the next few years, and we want to make sure you have access to the most up-to-date information possible. And you get that as well. So this is just an example for the purpose of the podcast to give you a ballpark figure.
Yes. So if you were doing $35 an hour for a 5-hour shift, that is $175 plus superannuation, which currently is 11.5% and is going up to 12% in a few months. It's around $200. Let's say you're used to calculating that based on a contracting basis, and maybe you're paying like $55, including super, per client. Now, if they see 5 clients, they get $275. But what we recognize is that more often than not, on average, therapists are booked 80 to 90% of the time. So if you then work that out at, say, 80%, that's $220. So you can see that the minimum award rate, you can pay above the award rate. You can see that the minimum award rate is actually fairly close to what someone would earn as a contractor in most circumstances. Now, if you've got a premium price, you can absolutely afford to pay more and still not put out how much you're earning. And if you have a therapist who exceeds a target, so let's say you set a target of 80%, and if they exceed that target, let's say they reach over 90%, you might pay them a bonus. Or if they do it consistently, you might just say, you're a consistently good performer, I'm just going to increase your hourly rate. So there are lots of ways that you can structure that. You can start with the award rates. A lot of clients will do this because they don't know how it's going to go, and they're just going to see. They get 3 months or 6 months or 12 months in and realize that, they're doing really well, like profitability wise, it's really working. And then they decide, I want to reward my therapist and pay them more or give a bonus or whatever structure works best based on their business. There's lots of options. Once you pay the minimum, you can do whatever you want in excess of that, essentially.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that's probably a really wise way to start is because often
Mm.
a lot of therapists will want to over deliver and
Hmm.
then freak out if it's not working financially.
Yeah.
And the recommendation would be pay the award because that's what the government has deemed the amount of risk and responsibility that we have as practitioners and in the allied
Hmm.
health space, that this is what the fair and reasonable amount of money is.
Yes.
So pay that because
Yeah.
you can always go up, but you
You
can
can't go down.
yeah, no, they really don't like
No.
it, in my experience. They
No.
really don't appreciate being paid less money than you started with. So,
Yeah.
because all of a sudden your business isn't going so well. So if you pay them at the base rate, it gives you, especially if you're learning and
Flexibility.
it's a first one, it gives you flexibility to go
Hmm.
in a space that your profitability actually allows.
Absolutely. And I've had clients come to me and say, like, oh, they used to earn $55 a treatment as a contractor. So I want to offer them $50 an hour. And I'm like, yeah, 15 minutes between clients, right? They're like, yes. Okay, so it's not $50 an hour. It's now like it's not $50 a treatment. It's now like 62.50 plus super for that treatment. And I haven't thought about that.
Yeah.
Or people are like, oh, I have half an hour in between clients. And I'm like, unless you are charging a very healthy price for that, you can't afford to pay a therapist a half an hour in between our treatments. It's just it will kill your bottom line. You'll be one of those therapists that are not paying themselves,
Yeah.
or you're only paying yourself what you would pay yourself if you were an employee, not paying yourself to own the business and all the extra time that you spend running it, which happens a lot, unfortunately.
And this
Um,
is, again, a beautiful example of how running your own practice has given you so much more insight
yes,
than just the HR legislation. Yeah, because you know what
absolutely.
this is like. You actually
Hmm.
understand the profitability and how important that is.
Yeah.
And I guess, can you talk a little bit about, we talk about the break-even point, which is
Mm-hmm.
how you know that you're making enough profit. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like, can you share a bit about your understanding? How do you explain what break-even point is and making sure that you are profitable in paying your staff?
Yeah. So, like, there's one thing to look at how much your therapist is earning. So to look at their revenue projections and their profit projections and what that costs as a percentage of the two. So, like, let's say their wages are 55% on average, for example. That's fine, and that's perfect information. You need to know that, right? But that doesn't take into account the whole business expenses. So if you have let's say you have a clinic and an admin person, and it costs you, I don't know, let's pick a round number, $1,000 a week to run that clinic, including, and that's probably low actually. If you're, let's say you've got like a very part-time receptionist, I'm just going to pick a round figure because it's easier. Costs you $1,000 a week to run the business, and you make, let's say, $50 per treatment that your therapists deliver. It will take you, what's that, 40 treatments before you've paid the bills. So there actually is no profit in those therapists, if you are seeing under 40 clients per week as a clinic. So it's about identifying what that point is and then going, okay, well, I obviously want to make more money than just paying the bills. So,
Yeah.
if you look at it and think like, well, I personally probably spend 20 hours a week running the business on top of the 20 hours a week that I treat that I get paid for, because you've factored that in as well. Um, and how much money do I want to earn for the responsibility and the time and the risk in putting yourself on the line to own a business? And so, that figure might be $1,000 or it might be $500. So let's say it's 500. You need another 10 treatments from your therapist in order to produce enough profit to pay yourself that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, and you might look at that and go, well, if I have 50 treatments a week, probably need a receptionist doing 20 hours a week, not one doing 10. And therefore my cost base will increase to say $1,200 a week. So actually I then need an extra four on top of that because I've had to pay more in receptionist wages, or I've had to spend more on marketing. Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's worth just kind of, rather than this is what I charge, this is what I want to pay them, and I'm going to try and fit that all together. What I'm
Mm,
hearing in there is the way James describes this is you've got to put your business hat on. So you put your
yeah.
business hat on and you're like, right, I'm making business decisions here. I'm not
Hmm.
thinking like a therapist who just wants to care for someone.
Hmm.
I'm actually like, right, I'm going to look at my business as a whole because if I go broke, no one gets helped.
Yeah.
Because that can be at the end of the day, if we keep doing the nice, I just want to be liked and all that kind of stuff, we don't end up anywhere. Like we just end up
Yeah.
broke, burnt out, and deciding we're going to leave the industry and go somewhere else. So
Absolutely.
if we look at it and go, okay, I'm going to tip it upside down. I'm going to tip everything, tip the toys out of the pram, so to speak, and go, I'm just going to actually have a look and go, okay, first of all, how much money do I want to make?
Hmm.
Put that in. Yeah. How much time am I willing to put in? What can I generate as a therapist? What could a staff member generate? What would I need them to be making? And just kind of actually map it all out rather than go from the bottom down. We actually
Yeah.
go from the top. So bottom up, we go from the top down
Top down. Yeah.
to go, this is actually what I need to come into my clinic every single week, every single month, every single year, depending on how your brain is wired. Because some
Hmm.
people are weekly, some people are monthly, some people are
Hmm.
yearly or quarterly, whatever, however you're wired
Yeah.
to actually go, you know what, I need to be charging 120 or 130 or 150 for my services. If I want
Yeah.
to do it the way I want it, that's actually how I have to do that. And if I've got
Yes.
my business hat on, it doesn't matter how I do that. What matters is I know that that's actually where I need to be at in order
Mm.
to create the business sustainably that I want.
Yes. Absolutely.
And if I put my business coaching hat on, that's probably where I see people making a huge mistake. Is that, I mean, we will always recommend your services for people in Australia because we can see the value and how important it is to get that right.
Mm.
And yet people will still they'll try really hard to make it work on what they had. And it's like,
Hmm.
instead of doing that, actually, let's just kind of decide if I'm going to move into the business side of things and I'm going to employ, I have to build my business muscle and start from a clean slate and go, actually, this is
Yeah.
actually the kind of level I need to be running my business. I can't keep doing what I've always done because I'm going to get
Yeah.
the same results I've always gotten.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's really interesting when you talk about projections, whether you do it weekly, annually, etc. It doesn't matter. My one of the things I see people make the mistake on regularly though is, or the thing that they don't know how to calculate is if you have a therapist working for you, or yourself, right, you will most likely only ever work about 46 weeks a year,
Yeah.
especially if they're full time, because they get 4 weeks of annual leave. And then
Mhm.
there are public holidays that they still get paid for if they're not working. If they were days, that would have been days they would work. And they might take some sick leave. So if we average it out, it's 46 weeks a year. So when you think about their revenue projection, if they can earn, let's say they're a full-time employee and they earn $1,000 a week, um, that's lower than the rate, but let's say they're part-time and they earn $1,000 a week, that's $52,000 a year. Easy math, right? And let's say they based on their number of appointments available per week at a particular utilization or booking rate, so let's say 80%, they might bring in $2,000 revenue. They do not bring you in $104,000 in revenue a year. They
That's
bring
right.
you in 46 weeks of that. So what's that? It's like 992. Yes, be
Yeah.
92.
Yeah.
Um, and people forget about that if they're looking on a weekly basis. And then they wonder why, when someone's on leave, it's really hard to get through that week because they're paying wages if they're permanent, but they're not getting any revenue. Now it's different if you have casual employees because you don't pay casuals when they don't work.
Yeah.
But there are rules around casual employment. So, most of the time, it depends slightly it's slightly different on different industries and in different businesses. But if you're hiring your first massage therapist, you are most likely going to hire them on casual. And as you build their client base, you can then offer them permanent part-time employment based on their ordinary hours that they work. It's pretty uncommon in massage to have full-time therapists because full-time would be 38 hours a week.
Yeah.
Now we had, and I've got other clients that do this. We had one therapist who was pretty good at some of the admin stuff. She really liked social media. So she was employed for about 28 hours a week as a therapist, so about 22 clients. And the other 10 hours she did admin.
Yeah.
So we did have a full-time therapist, but not because she was treating full-time. Whereas, physios and chiros, for example, or osteos, like, or those types, that style of allied health, they're much more likely to employ people full time straight off the bat, because it's more competitive in like to get those employees. And they just have to work hard to fill them really quickly because otherwise they won't get the therapist to work for them in the first place. Yeah, so it's really, and it also depends because if you've got a larger business, let's say you've already got 5 therapists, you might have a wait list of 10 people every week. If you hired someone part-time tomorrow, you know that you've got 10 clients to give them. And you know that if you turn your marketing on, that you can get 5 new clients next week.
Yeah.
So it depends on where you're at your business stage. But for early first employers, normally casual. And then once you're a bit more stable, you can consider going straight to part-time.
So in terms of like KPIs and expectations, this is another grey shaded area that I see as a business coach. Again, coming from a perspective of people either assume that others will do what they want because that's what they did and it's all very normal, or they want to people please. There is kind of no in between. So tell me a bit about how do you set expectations? Like how do you create some boundaries around that, Norelle?
I always love a bit of Brene Brown. I remember her saying like clear is kind. Um, and no one, like if you think about your therapist or admin employees, whatever, no one likes to feel like they aren't doing a good job. But if they don't know what good looks like, how do they know if they are doing a good job? So that's one thing to keep in mind. So if you're like a bit of a people pleaser, which I definitely can be, I have to be careful of that. So, yep. I have to remember like it's unkind to not be clear because then it flips it around to being about being a nice person still. So it's a bit of a little mind trick. So that's one thing. And then I guess the other is like if you're too hard with people, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't set strong boundaries, but if you are too harsh in your delivery of the criticism instead of it being constructive, you will also put people on the back foot. So you need to be really, really carefully clear about the delivery of that, but also have good expectations. Have an expectation that you expect them to rebook. I don't know, 70, 80, 90% of clients, whatever works for you. What standard do you go by again? I think it's about 80.
Yeah, we had an 85% rebooking rate
Yeah.
across the team. We had a
Yeah.
75% minimum.
Yeah.
And I used to do anyone who was struggling, we would do work with them first. And then if they still hadn't been able, if we hadn't been able to shift it, we'd do role play at the desk.
Yeah.
And I found that people preferred to rebook their clients than to do role play with me because that was a little bit scary. And they felt more weird doing it, trying to rebook me, my own clinic, than they did by just talking to their clients about it. It wasn't something that I intentionally did. It was something that just kind of happened because I'd worked at a chiropractic clinic. And they were like, I just want to see this person every 5 seconds. In my mind, it's not actually what they said, but that's what it seemed like. So I'm like, oh, this is easy for me. All I have to do is rebook them in once a week. Oh, that's no problem. So I can do that. I asked them to come 3 times a week, just want to come once. And so it meant that we created a really great ecosystem and sort of, I guess, really great habits in the clinic to create that environment where that's how we did it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, quite often a lot of my clients are hiring grads. So they don't have the skills yet being the optimum word. And so it's about being supportive and teaching them why we offer rebooking, for example, not to be salesy, not to make money, but because this person genuinely needs that treatment. You can see it's going to help them. So go into the conversation with that in mind. Because often when people push back on rebooking, when therapists push back on asking, they're the objections, right? Or sometimes maybe they don't want to ask and be told no, like that can be a bit scary. There's lots of like mindset reasons as to why, but you can work around that. So I think that's really important because if you are building, let's say you're getting 5 new clients a week for your new therapist and they're not rebooking them, like you're never going to fill their books. It'll just be a constant revolving door. And they won't hit the targets that they want to hit in terms of how much they want to earn. Your clients are walking back out and being like, my back's still sore. I went that one time. wasn't that supposed to fix me?
Yeah.
Like, or whatever they're thinking. And someone else is, is asking them to rebook and then solves their problem, or solves their
Re-
problem. But
resolves the issue.
yes, that one, yes. Um, yeah, and I mean, there are other targets we can look at around like revenue, for example. But a lot of the time, you're not focusing on that directly with your client, with your therapist. You're probably more focusing on how many appointments do you have available? How many do we want to see booked? And what rebooking rate do we want to see from you?
Yeah.
Um, and then as a clinic, you should really be tracking those for each individual therapist so that you can see when one of them is falling off.
Yeah.
And tracking things like your marketing so that you can see, yeah, I know if I spend this much money on average, I end up with like, look at all those new clients that came in those weeks that I ran advertising.
Yeah.
So you know what's working and what's not.
Yeah. And that testing and measuring is so vital in
Yeah.
tracking those numbers. And I think it's even more vital. It has to be done every week, especially when you very first hire. Because
Hmm.
regardless of whether you think in weeks, months, days, years, whatever it is, being able to see where your money is going
Hmm.
every week, every week will help you be profitable right from the start and know if
Absolutely.
you're not. And so that you can know what lever to put to work in order to make it.
Yeah. And also, it's about having data to avoid the emotions, right? Because it's very easy to think, oh, I didn't make enough money this week. And then when you look at the figures, it's like, oh, actually, pretty good week. Or we did better than last week. Or yes, it was a low week, but I can also see we had a low week 2 months ago and then it was fine again. So you sort of
Yeah.
build that internal sense of it's going to be okay, because otherwise we make rash decisions.
And our emotions tend to match our bank account. And bank account full, woohoo, I feel really good. Bank account empty, I feel sad. Like
Yeah.
bank account full, I feel good. It's like we want to kind of ride that out. You're human, so those kind of emotions.
Yeah.
But being able to have the data will allow you to ride that out
Yeah.
smoothly.
And
What
thinking about the bank account being full, that reminds me. So, I know you guys taught us this. I remember reading the book Profit First, right? And it talks about your buckets. So, if anyone hasn't heard Leash talk about this before, it's very much the idea that um, you have let's say you've got the bucket that all the money comes into, and then you've got a bucket to pay your tax, and you have a bucket to pay yourself, like however you've set that up. But in that tax bucket, when you have employees, you have to withhold tax that you owe to the ATO on their behalf. So, if their wage is $50,000 a year, they might owe $10,000 tax. So what that looks like is each week you pay them, say, 800 instead of 1,000, and you send the other 200 to the ATO. And then you also owe another 100 odd dollars of superannuation. They're very loose figures, and that is not 100% correct math, but for the
very good.
purposes of an illustration.
Yes.
Um, so you owe 200 tax, 100 super, and 800 to the employee. So you pay the employee, and then you've got $300 sitting there in your account. What are you going to do with it? You're going to stick it in the tax account, because what happens is if you don't, it accumulates in your account because you only have an obligation to pay it quarterly with your BAS, basically, and the super is due at the same time as your BAS. It's a separate payment, but same timing. Um, you can actually pay that earlier. If you want to pay them weekly because you want it out of your account so you don't accidentally spend it, you can do that, but you don't have to. But the reality is if you leave it in your account, you think like, woohoo, like we're creaming it. And then you go spend a bunch of money and buy a new table or whatever you do. And you get to the end of the quarter and realize that that was actually tax that you owed. Yes, so 100%. And each week, like if you have Xero or any of those payroll softwares, you plug in the number you owe the employee and it will automatically calculate the tax and the super. You do
Yeah.
not have to do this manually. It is literally you look at the report, and if you have 10 employees, it will give you a total. You're like,
Yeah.
cool, I need to transfer $2,000 to that account this week. Done.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is so you sleep better at night knowing this stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
Because look, I've tried, but the ATO won't take a massage table as payment. They prefer cold hard cash.
Hmm.
If I could, I would, but no, they won't take
Hmm.
shoes. They
No.
won't take holidays. They only will take actual money. So it's
Hmm.
good to have that set aside, and that
Absolutely.
you don't get yourself into a pickle. That's a really good call.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about hiring. How do you know who the right
Mm.
candidates are? What are some
Mm,
questions?
yes.
What can we ask about interviewing and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest overarching piece of advice is don't hire them just because they have the right skills and experience. Because if they are not a personality fit, it will not go well for your business. And whether that comes down to they are not the right style of therapist for your business, like, maybe you run something, maybe you're a little bit more relaxed, or, you have, I don't want to say like a day spa vibe, but, you have that more soft, flowy, lovely style, and you hire someone who's like gung-ho sports massage, wants to be in a gym. They're probably not going to suit your clientele. Now, and even if you do find someone who has that, who has the right style and flow, if their personality is not aligned with your clinic, then that also is not a great fit.
Yeah.
And now this isn't to say that you have to hire everyone who's like you, because
Yeah.
that is also not great. Like personality wise, if you hire a whole bunch of yous, they will be not good at all the things that you are also not good at, and you do not end up with a well-rounded team.
Yeah.
Um, as people, we have a tendency to like people who are like us or who we want to be like. So sometimes we have a little bit of bias based on them being the same as us. So there's like a balance, right? But it needs to be, need to have the right mindset and approach and personality, not from personality type, but from the way they interact and see the world to fit into your team.
Yeah.
Another one I've often seen too, like I had this conversation with someone the other day about wanting someone who has like slight entrepreneurial flair, like enough that they want to like grow their client base because they understand that that is also good for them, but not so much that they want to go and start their own business in a year. And now some of those people can make great employees if their plan is in 5 years to go off and start a business. If you get a few years out of them, then that's perfect. But often understanding their aspirations around where they want to be can be really helpful.
Yeah.
I remember one of our early fails. We had this he's a mature age student, lovely guy. He'd come from, I think he worked in marketing. He had some sort of corporate career, and I think he was earning six figures, like from a job. So actually taking home before tax 6 figures, not just revenue, right? And so he'd done all right for himself, and he wanted a career change. He'd moved into massage, came and worked for us, and we said, look, we can't offer you like permanent work to start off with. It'll be casual. As it grows, you'll get more hours. We were very early in our clinic phase at that stage, so we didn't have a lot of the big systems and structure in place at that stage yet. Anyway, after a few weeks, he was sort of still unhappy with how many hours he was getting and what he was earning. And we had a really honest conversation with him about how much he wanted to earn. And he essentially said, I want to get back to earning $2,000 a week, which is six figures over a year. And I was like, you are probably never going to earn that working for someone else. Like you would have to bring in close to 4,000, maybe $3,500, $4,000 in revenue. So unless you are going to see 35 clients a week at $110 a client,
Yeah.
which is mostly unachievable. I've met a few people that do see big numbers, or unless you're going to charge a higher value, which at that stage we were only, this is maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we're only charging about 100, 110.
Yeah.
It was just never going to happen. And so we had a really honest conversation with him about that, the fact that we would never be able to pay him that based on our business model,
Yeah.
and that he'd perhaps be better off going out on his own,
Yeah.
because he could potentially earn that much if he ran the business himself.
Yeah.
So there is value in talking about expectations and where people want to go,
Yeah.
understanding their motivations for what they want to do. And then in terms of interview questions, sometimes I like things like why us?
Yeah.
Yeah, why now? It's particularly if they're a new grad, why now is not really useful because the
Yeah.
answer is because I'm graduating.
Yeah.
But if you've got an experienced therapist coming to you looking for work, like why now? What's prompting you to look? Someone shared this with me recently, and I really loved this one. It was something like, if we looked back in 12 months, what would an amazing 12 months have looked like for you? But
Okay.
another one was, what would we have to do to make you leave us?
Oh,
I
okay.
know. It was a
Yeah,
bit
right.
bold. And I was like,
Yeah, yeah.
oh,
Okay.
and you might get answers like, oh, well, like, I don't know, if you micromanaged me, or if you, like, if this happened, or if you made me do this thing that I don't like, or, you get some interesting answers. So I
Yeah.
thought that was pretty funky. Yeah, I've actually got I can share a link with you to that. I've got like 29 interview questions, which is now 32 because I found three new ones that I really liked so much that I added them on. 32 is not as catchy as 29 though.
Make it with 34. Maybe we're going to get to 30 questions.
Yeah, no, maybe I need to come up with a few more.
It's
I wouldn't recommend asking 29 interview questions, by the way, just so we're clear. You normally want to
good
ask
to know, good to know. But yeah, it's more just to have like a selection of
options.
ones that can be really
Yes.
helpful. Go, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that." Yeah, I think interviewing is such it's an interesting space.
Mm,
I've got teenagers who are going and applying for jobs now. And
mm,
that's really interesting. My daughter applied for a national chain, and I'm like, well, she's like, what sort of questions do they ask? And she'd only really seen information on TikTok and YouTube. So
mhm.
don't judge my parenting style too harshly. But I'm like, it's probably nothing like that. Yeah, they just want to get to
Mhm,
know you. So she under my recommendation was, I'm like, find out about the place. What year did it start?
mhm, mhm.
And she's like, that was the first question they asked. What do you know about
Oh
this?
wow.
And
Yeah.
she spoke first. She's only just turned 15 and she spoke first to say,
Oh.
this is the year it started. Somebody else spoke next and knew where the first store was. And I'm like, oh, that was
Mhm.
a good one. That was a really good one.
Yeah.
But I think it shows a lot to say, well, I've researched this company that I'm working
Mhm.
for. It's not just a job here.
Yes.
And I think if you're listening to this and you're thinking about going for a job, have a think about why. I know
Mm,
for me, and my daughter's response was going to be, I have some savings goals I want to achieve, and she
mhm,
does. I'm like, I'd be stoked with that answer. I kind
mm,
of secretly loved it when my staff got a loan for a car or
mhm.
a house or a block of land, had a
Yeah.
child, got engaged. Like actually all of those things meant they really had to work. Yeah, like that was
Yeah.
so invested because they had
Yeah.
reason to do it. And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
don't be afraid to give people an honest answer if you are going for an interview.
Mm,
And it's okay for that to be about you. Yeah, like I want to give to
mm.
the company and I have these other goals that I want to achieve too. Because
Yeah.
I think it tells potential employers quite a lot about you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can also be things like, and I love the type of clients that you service because I resonate with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But ultimately, people have like, we live in a material world, right? Like, I'd love to not work and, go, I was going to say sip margaritas on a beach, but more like, sit out in a lovely block in nature and just enjoy my life, but we have bills to pay. And absolutely. So if someone says to me like, yep, I really love what you do, and I really want to buy a house. And
Yeah.
the reason I want to be an employee and not a contractor is because I need stability in my income
Yeah.
and I need to be able to get a bank loan. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a great reason to employ someone. Like that makes them a perfect employee.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because when I have clients who are, often people come to me and say, like, I've got a team of contractors and they know they want to change. So they're like, and I'm like, no judgment. It's okay. Like it is
Yeah.
what it is, right? You are where you are, and that's okay. You recognize you want to change. And they're like, how do we make them employees? And I work through like, okay, well, what's their roster? What are you charging? How much are you paying them? What does that look like? Let's do an average of what they've earned over the last 3, 6, or 12 months, and then compare that to what you would offer them as an employee.
Yeah.
And let's work through that because then with clarity, revenue projections, cost, wage costs, they know. So they're not like, oh, but I'm going to lose money. Or I get paid more as a contractor. You can come up with something that looks attractive to them. And often it's the ones who are like, I really want to get a mortgage, or I hate that my income changes every week and I really would love if it's stable because often massage types are more caring and stable in their personality type, and therefore they like consistency. So
Mm.
sometimes people will be much more inclined to want to go and have a stable wage than you think they will. You assume that because, like, we assume other people want the same thing as us. And if you're an entrepreneur, you're probably looking to make more money. But let's be honest, like, you don't get into business just because, like, yes, it will be amazing to have a business and help more people and you have a big goal, but you don't do it without wanting to also make money to be compensated for all of your effort to build the business normally. Sometimes maybe. But generally, there's a bit of a driver there. But you have to remember that all of your employees are not necessarily like that. They're not driven by the same things.
Yeah. And it's so true because often people are like, oh, but I wouldn't want to work for that. No, that's because you have the courage to go and launch your own business and
Yes.
take on all that risk and you love the personal development. It's all amazing. Great. Good for you. You're, like you said, your team are not you. Your team often
Mm,
have different reasons for wanting to be there. And when you
yeah.
create an environment and a culture that is out of this world, people will want that more because they know that they are cared for, they are valued, they are
Yeah.
respected, and that they're actually better. Like when they leave, they're going to be a better person. They're going to actually be
Yes.
pouring themselves along a journey that
Yeah.
is worth so much to so many people. And that's okay at the end
Hmm.
of the day. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Norelle, I want to say thank you so much for your incredible wisdom and insight that you have shared with us today. We'll pop all the resources in the show notes. But I just want to say thank you so much for all the work that you do in the allied health space here in
Oh,
Australia. It's a pleasure to be able to refer clients to you, but it's also a pleasure to know that you take really great care of them. You understand
mm,
the award, you understand the legislation, and how that actually works in our business as well. So
mm.
thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.